Every competitor in this segment has gone Turbo 4 or hybrid. Honda kept the naturally aspirated V6 in 2026. Either this is brilliant or they're stubborn. What's it like? Buckle up, my friends. Let's go for a drive. I'm your host, Brian Makse, racer, lover of driving fast, fun things. And on this channel, you get reviews for drivers from drivers. Now, this naturally aspirated V6 makes 285 horsepower, maybe gets 19 miles per gallon city, which is exactly what you'd expect from Honda if they applied their engineering from 2016 in a 2026 model. Whether that's comfort and consistency or a stubborn refusal to adapt depends entirely on your perspective and whether you value the character of an engine more than your fuel budget. And before we get into what this is like to drive, let's have a look at it in a little more depth. For 2026, this Passport is all new, but it's important to understand that this TrailSport's capabilities were baked in from the beginning, meaning they engineered it for off-roading first before they ever considered where to put the cup holders. True story. The wheelbase is a couple of inches longer and torsional rigidity is up significantly compared to the previous generation. And yes, it is unibody construction. The powertrain starts with one of Honda's delightful naturally aspirated V6s. 3.5 liters of displacement, variable cylinder management, variable valve timing, of course, makes 285 horsepower at 6,100 RPM and 262 pounds of torque at 5,000 RPM. Transmission's a 10-speed automatic. This is their second generation torque vectoring all-wheel drive system. It's got the capacity for 40% more torque than before and a 30% faster response time. It's capable of sending 70% of torque rearward with 100% of that rear torque capable of going to either side. Steering is electrically assisted. Suspension at the front's based around McPherson struts, multi-link at the rear. Damping and spring rates are unique to this TrailSport. Has four-wheel disc brakes, of course. Also unique to the TrailSport are the 18-inch wheels and tires. This does come on general grabber all-terrains. We are in winter mode, so we are in a winter tire at the moment. And if you look closely, the wheel design protects the valve stems. Curb weight is a tick over 4,700 pounds. Towing capacity is 5,000 pounds. This has roughly 23-degree approach and departure angles and 8.3 inches of ground clearance. And for context, that's 1/10 of an inch greater ground clearance than the CR-V, and they call this Honda's most capable off-roader yet, which is kind of like adding an inch of wingspan to a chicken and calling it a bird of prey. What makes this a TrailSport? Well, that's actually interesting. You get steel skid plates covering the oil pan, transmission, fuel tank, and all designed by Honda's Powersports division, and they can support the vehicle's entire weight when crashing onto rocks. General co-developed the grabber all-terrain tires with Honda. The TrailSport also gets different spring and damping rates. The recovery hooks are rated at twice the Passport TrailSport's gross vehicle weight rating, and the front ones break away in crashes, which apparently is a world-first patent. The hardware definitely backs up the styling. Subscribers get notified when new episodes drop on this channel. Non-subscribers hope the algorithm shows it to them eventually. If you want to control when you see our episodes on YouTube, well, that's what the subscribe button does. This seating position and the driver interface is simply perfect for me. I have no complaints. I'm seated properly in this Passport. I've got a great interface to the steering wheel and to the pedals. Lots of adjustment in the seat, although they are basic. They are powered, and the steering wheel adjusts for reach and height, and it's manual, of course. But I've got a great seating position here that results in excellent visibility, and for me, all of this works. I find these seats a wonderful compromise between comfort and support. They're definitely comfortable over long distances and just enough lateral support when the off-roading gets interesting. Ergonomically, this is all very Honda, and if you're accustomed to Honda, you feel right at home. Nothing is really out of the ordinary. Lots of button switches and dials, especially for the climate controls. This is just fantastic. And, I'm looking at the steering wheel, and having driven a Civic or a couple of Civics recently, This looks like the same wheel, but it's actually a larger diameter than what's in the Civic, which makes sense because we are in a big SUV after all. The digital instrument cluster is fantastic. It's legible in all kinds of lighting conditions. Lots of information available here as well. It's customizable to a certain degree. And when you're off-roading, I think you can get pitch and roll readouts in the instrument cluster as well. Now, about this infotainment system, there's a lot to talk about. It's a Google-based system, which works exactly how you'd expect. Most of the time brilliantly, and then sometimes you're yelling at an assistant about why it doesn't play the podcast that you want. Wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto are standard, and I run this on Apple CarPlay, works just fine. As well, there's a wireless charging pad, and it doesn't exactly hold your phone securely when you're doing anything more than light off-roading. Running it on wireless CarPlay, for me anyway, makes it very easy to live with, but otherwise, I think it's 80% excellent and then 20% maddening, which somehow is very Honda. In terms of spaciousness, even though this is not as big as a Pilot, I find it highly usable. There's lots of space in this front row for yourself and your passenger, and then lots of space to carry your stuff. I cannot believe how much stuff I have in this armrest right now. I'd be embarrassed to open it, but there are at least 4 bottles of water, and decent sized ones at that. My dash cam's in there and a bunch of other stuff. So this is very useful. Still, there's a couple of cup holders here. The wireless phone charger that I mentioned, there's a little space here to hold stuff. Lots of useful storage in the doors as well. Then in the second row, there's actually more room than the previous generation Passport. Sure, that might not sound like anything, but then when you sit back there, you realize that adults can actually fit comfortably. The split folding rear seats drop quickly. There's no weird controls there, and you have more cargo space than the previous generation, of course. The cargo floor is high because there's a full-size spare underneath, which most people should appreciate, and some will curse just because of that higher load height. I think there's 4 hidden storage wells in the back, and they're completely useful, not token cubbies for loose change or discarded Red Bull cans. I don't know how many cup holders are inside this Passport, but there are a lot because clearly Honda's engineers and designers definitely hydrate. In terms of visibility, it's actually excellent because there's tall glass all around, and even in this lowest seating position, I'm seated high off the road and I've got wonderful visibility in all directions. Large outboard mirrors, adjust those and your rear view mirror properly and blind spots aren't real. Of course, the camera system in the Passport definitely helps with parking and augments the whole driving experience, especially when you go off-roading, because there are some off-road modes and gives you some extra visibility that you couldn't get from here in the driver's seat. If you want to support the channel beyond just watching, well, the merch store is open. Lots of cool stuff there. What that means is more time producing great content like this and less time worrying about manufacturer blacklists. No pressure, just an option. Being the one responsible for how this V6 deploys its power is a bit of a throwback. A naturally aspirated V6 is becoming more and more rare, and this one just delivers power in a linear way that's unlike modern engines. And on top of that, it's happy to rev all the way to its 6,500 RPM red line. I didn't test it, but apparently this Passport TrailSport will do 0 to 60 in 7.2, 7.3, 7.4, something like that. That's not super quick, but that's also not the point. Throttle response is immediate from idle, which matters around town and matters more off-road, much more than peak horsepower. In a lot of ways, it's deliberately old school in a segment that chases efficiency numbers over driver engagement. You may pay for that decision at the pump, but the trade-off is predictability anytime you ask for power. Great thing is the power band is broad. Max torque arrives at about 5,000 RPM, so you've got to work for it just like a good naturally aspirated Honda motor. I have no complaints about the transmission because it's wonderfully beautifully resolved to work with this motor, and it does all of the right things. The ratios seem well chosen. It'll hold gears when I want it to without even asking. In trail mode, it actually locks out higher gears and maximizes engine braking on descents. There are shift paddles on the back of the steering wheel when you want to control the gearbox manually, and they work great exactly as prescribed. Use them off-road and no complaints there. I think the only complaint, not really about the transmission, but the shifter itself, this is still not intuitive. Maybe I need some more time behind the wheel with automatic equipped Hondas. The best part about this transmission is that it just operates competently in the background, and it doesn't make it seem like it was programmed to chase maximum fuel consumption numbers. It just does everything right. This all-wheel drive system is incredible, and there are a couple of situations that I didn't think this Passport TrailSport was going to get us through on first attempts, but indeed it did. Some steep climbs, some sketchy, muddy, deep water, and this thing pulled through. As I mentioned earlier, the all-wheel drive system is improved over the previous generation, and it definitely shows. On steep climbs, it prioritizes a rearward torque bias, and then in ruts, it actually shuffles power between each corner to maximize available grip. And don't forget, physics still requires suspension articulation and wheel travel for tires to stay in contact with the road, and with all these wintry conditions, it highlights how well the all-wheel drive system works, and it worked incredibly well. The like button tells YouTube to share this video with more people like you who want to learn about the Honda Passport TrailSport. Takes 1 second, and if this episode shared more information than what's contained in a brochure or a press release, well, that's the entire ask. Dynamically, this suspension is incredible in almost every situation. Off-roading does an excellent job. On the road, very comfortable, compliant. Body and wheel control is excellent. But as I discovered, only at the extreme limits of grip does this show you where the compromises hide. Incidentally, and it had to happen this way, but I discovered what the Passport TrailSport handles like at its limits of grip on pavement. And there, as we got closer to its limits, body control wasn't as refined as it is in every other situation. Now, this is not a Civic Type R by any stretch of the imagination, and that kind of driving is not what this is intended for. What it is intended for is day-to-day driving on the road and occasional off-roading. And in those situations, this is excellent, especially off-roading. I was surprised at how competent this is. There were never any situations where the tires were not in contact with the road surface when we're off-roading. And then on-road, this thing is incredibly comfortable. Body and wheel motion, very well controlled. And again, this is not a Civic Type R, so we don't need to be hustling it through the corners. Steering's electrically assisted, of course, and what that means is there's not a lot of feel or feedback that comes through the steering wheel. Thankfully, steering is direct and precise, and it's easy to control this Passport. Day-to-day driving in the city where I live, out here in the country, off-roading, and even on the highway, the steering just does what it expects you to do. Maybe it's not as strong as some of the competition on center, but in every condition does exactly what I want. And yeah, there's a little bit of artificial heft to it, but all around just works. Brakes, on the other hand, are exactly what you expect from Honda. Lots of power, great modulation, and great pedal feel. I've got a lot of confidence in this brake pedal, and I'm not surprised. I've got precise control of the attitude of this Passport TrailSport in any situation. If we're hustling it through corners, if we're off-road, just a wonderful all-around brake pedal, zero complaints. And as we experienced, ABS works great, the hill descent control works great. And it's one of those things, if you're on a longer off-road drive, that hill descent control allows you to maintain downhill speed without overtaxing the brakes. And overall, the brakes are not exciting, they're not sporting, they're just extremely competent and exactly what I expect from Honda. There are 7 different drive modes here: Sport, Normal, Econ, Snow, which we use a lot, Trail, which we use a lot, Sand, and tow, and all of them do very different things, but it's a lot of different modes for a whole lot of different driving situations. And in general, I just drive this around in normal and it's absolutely perfect. When we go off-road, however, then I'm throwing it into snow because it's snowy right now, or into the trail mode, which works wonderfully. And in that trail mode, I think they've recalibrated the throttle mapping because it's much more linear, which helps when you're off-roading. Plus, in that trail mode, they back off stability control just a little bit, but doesn't fully get disengaged. And in snow mode, it starts in second gear, which is clever because it reduces the amount of immediate torque getting to that contact patch. And although there are 7 different drive modes, and you probably won't access all of them with any kind of frequency, it's definitely a nice thing to have. One thing we should talk about and doesn't get discussed a lot, Honda has this agile handling assist technology. What it does, like many other manufacturers, Mazda's kinematic posture control, for example, it uses the stability system to do one interesting thing. In the corners, it will actually brake the inside rear wheel to keep the cornering attitude of this Passport a little flatter in the corners and give you a little bit more confidence when you're driving through those corners. And just like what some of those other manufacturers are doing, this agile handling assist is basically software doing the job that hardware used to do. How do you spec yours? Well, thankfully, this is an easy question to answer. There are some considerations, but what you are looking at is the 2026 Honda Passport TrailSport Elite in the US, or Touring in Canada, blackout, finished in ash green metallic paint with the black perforated leather interior with orange contrast stitching. Base price in the US for a TrailSport is $48,450. Dial this up to an Elite blackout edition and add the ash green metallic paint, and you get an as-tested price of $54,105. In Canada, base TrailSport runs $56,990. Add the Touring blackout and ash green metallic paint, and you get an as-tested price of $62,040, and these prices are before freight, taxes, fees, etc. Here's the math that nobody likes doing. This Passport TrailSport costs $10,000 to $15,000 less than its genuine off-road body-on-frame competitors, delivering at least 70% of their capabilities and 150% of their on-road refinement. If you're actually rock crawling or deep sand running, by the 4Runner, it's genuinely better at that specific job. If you're doing 90% pavement, 10% maintained fire roads, occasional snowy mountain passes, and want creature comforts that don't feel punitive, this Passport TrailSport makes sense. As well, the base TrailSport has all the off-road mechanical bits as this top trim level, so make your decision wisely. And before you get too excited about spending your hard-earned money on a new Passport TrailSport, let's hear what owners have to say about their real-world ownership experiences. First, the seating position, and if you're over 6 feet tall, the whole biomechanical situation behind the wheel on the seat creates an awkward angle for your knees, and the steering wheel doesn't telescope far enough to compensate for you tall folks. As well, some owners have reported that the front seats need a little bit of break-in. They're stiff for the first few hundred miles. As well, some owners have reported some quirks with the 10-speed automatic. At rolling stops, where you slow down but don't fully stop, the transmission hesitates when you get back on throttle, and then power arrives abruptly, so maybe consider stopping fully. Anyway, they also say first gear feels sluggish and jerky in stop-and-go traffic, and it's different behavior for those coming from the previous 9-speed. Good news is real-world fuel consumption actually exceeds EPA ratings. Owners are seeing 20 to 23 combined, with highway runs going as high as 25, which is a couple of miles per gallon better than the EPA highway numbers. Sure, that may be worse than some hybrid competitors, but definitely better than expected for a 4,700-pound SUV with a naturally aspirated V6. As you know, we didn't get to try them, the general grabber all-terrains. Well, owners say there's noticeable road noise above 65 miles an hour. Not annoying, they say, but it is the trade-off for off-road grip. Early owners also report that the Google built-in has some bugs. Several owners report that hands-free calling connects on the screen, but audio doesn't route through the speakers. Dealers fix it with system reboots, but the problem can reoccur. So the ownership reality? Seating ergonomics matter if you're on the tall side, and the transmission has a couple of quirks at low speeds. Fuel economy impresses, as does ride quality, especially for those coming from 4Runners or Wranglers, and that I definitely understand. If you own one of these or have a lot of quality seat time, I'd love to hear from you, especially with what I got right and what I got wrong. Real-world owner experiences are much more valuable than anything I can learn in a week-long press loan, and I always read those comments. My verdict, well, let's start with fuel consumption, get that out of the way. I've settled into about 15 miles per gallon in city, highway, and a little bit of off-road driving. That's 15 liters per 100 kilometers for my Canadian friends. Not entirely scientific. Regular viewers of the show know that I'm not afraid to use the throttle, so I'd love to hear from owners and understand what your real-world mileage is like in a Passport TrailSport. Now, about this naturally aspirated V6 decision, well, I think it's very, very Honda. That decision prioritizes linearity of power delivery over efficiency and immediate response over peak numbers, as well as some predictability over turbocharged or hybrid drivetrains. The automatic works well, and together, this drivetrain is deliberately old school in 2026, and either that's your priority or it isn't. Honda made that decision, and whether it's right depends entirely on what you value. And it's time for all of you turbo and hybrid haters in the comments to put your money where your mouths are. With this TrailSport, Honda built a unibody SUV with genuine off-road hardware for people who occasionally need that capability, but primarily drive on pavement. And that's a reasonably sized market, way bigger than the hardcore overlanding crowd that manufacturers pretend to serve with brochure photography. Owners will use those skid plates exactly never, but enjoy the excellent ride quality every day. As well, most owners will use that trail mode maybe once a year, but rely on adaptive cruise control every time they're behind the wheel. It's honest engineering for realistic use cases. The cynics will say that this Passport TrailSport is something you buy when you want off-road credibility without the off-road commitment. Kind of like buying hiking boots that look rugged, but you know you're just wearing them to craft breweries instead of climbing mountains. If you're pushing limits off-road, then this Passport TrailSport will show its limitations fairly quickly. Ground clearance, suspension travel, approach and departure angles. But if you're occasionally driving off-road, having to deal with weather like I'm doing, occasionally towing, and driving this Monday to Friday, well, it does all of those things brilliantly. I'm Brian Makse, and that's the 2026 Honda Passport TrailSport. Subscribe if you enjoyed this. Don't if you don't. Comments are open if you disagree as well. The merch store is open if you want some cool driver's gear. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.